Stanley. And thank you to the CARBICA leadership and the conference organizers, all of you, for the invitation to speak to you today. On behalf of the International Council on Archives, I congratulate you on the occasion of the 12th General Assembly and Conference of the Caribbean Archives Association, the Caribbean Regional Branch, and an especially vibrant branch, I'll say, of the International Council on Archives. Because I'm with you today as ICA's Vice President Program, I'd like to take advantage of the platform to not only congratulate you, but also to encourage everyone in attendance to take advantage of everything ICA has to offer. Given that motivation, and also my theme today, Archives and Records in the Politics of Digital Transformation, what I hope to do is provide a couple of variations on a theme, unpacking the various things we might mean by politics, as well as a couple of angles on digital transformation. The rest of the really interesting program for the conference this week will continue to draw on many of these same themes in impressive detail, which leaves me the luxury of just skimming over the surface of issues like digitization, digital preservation, and managing electronic records. You'll be in great hands for those topics later in the week. One of the reasons conferences like CARBICA's are important is that it gives us a chance to zoom way out to see the big picture of our field, and then zoom way in again to analyze conditions on the ground where we are, and then zoom out again to see if the big picture helps provide meaning or context or ideas or connections that will help us figure out the next step for us where we are. The International Council on Archives is a perfect vantage point to look at what's going on with archives and records from way up in the atmosphere where you can see the whole world. Although I get a good look from my role as VP Program for ICA, of course, I also have my feet on the ground in a very particular environment. As Stanley said, I work for the National Archives and Records Administration in the United States. I should clarify, though, at this point, that today I am not speaking for NARA. So opinions expressed are my own and not necessarily those of the National Archives. Today, I'm going to talk to you from both of these perspectives, though, the global and my own local perspective, with the goal of, yes, introducing you to ICA along the way, but mainly highlighting the way our digital transformation is affecting the entire records and archives profession, and the ways ICA is helping archivists get together to wrestle with these issues. Then from my local perspective, I'll give you an example of how archivists can embrace the political nature of digital transformation to exert their influence more widely than they otherwise could. Digital transformation also touches and is implicated in everything. Although it sounds like a technical issue, in fact, it's intertwined with issues that archivists and our users are passionate about, including community archives, repatriation of colonial or migrated archives, equity and representation in the archival records. Technology is just a tool for achieving what we want to achieve. Creating and deploying these tools can be so complex that we sometimes focus on them in our day-to-day lives as if deploying modern tools is the goal. It is not. The goals are the same goals that motivate all archival work: community, memory, connection, understanding, and even wisdom that can come from seeing the traces that the past has left in its records. So the key thing is that the digital transformation of records and archives is not a separate track of archival development from all our other concerns. It's the way that we achieve, or in some cases, it's a way we risk undermining our most deeply held archival goals. So with all that as a preface, let me begin the first part of my talk, introducing the International Council on Archives, its work to address the digital transformation, and how you can all benefit or get more involved. Since the ICA can help us zoom out to the global level and give us a nice, long historical view, I want to tell a story about a campaign to gather support, political campaign, if you will, to gather support for the ICA's original creation. In 1946, Solon J. Buck, who was both Archivist of the United States and also President of the Society of American Archivists at that time, wrote and distributed an influential article calling for the creation of an International Council for Archivists. After all the destruction and the movements of people and records that were caused by World War II, and also seeing the rise of important new international organizations whose records would be critical for understanding the post-war period, Buck argued that the international community of archivists needed a forum to address these challenges. The point of Buck's article was not merely that archivists need to collaborate and learn from each other the way people do in any professional association. His point was that the history of the world is so interrelated, and the archives of the world are so entangled with the archival records of other nations, that really only by working together across national boundaries can archivists hope to create a truly complete archival record. A loss of one country's records is a loss to humanity's history, and it'll damage other countries' opportunities to fully understand their own histories. In calling for the creation of an International Council on Archives, Buck acknowledged that some regional associations already existed to do this work, including the Association of Librarians, Archivists, and Custodians of Museums of the Caribbean area, which was already active in the early 1940s, well before the ICA. So again, congratulations to the archivists of the Caribbean. In describing the interrelatedness of national archival fonds, Buck was thinking about the post-war Atlantic North primarily. But what he was arguing is even more obviously true from the point of view of the post-colonial Caribbean. The records of national history are often not in our own hands, but in the hands of former colonial powers. This is a point of symbolic harm as well as vast frustration with the practical hurdles in access to records. This is just one especially relevant proof of the insight behind the creation of ICA. Human history and the archival record is only complete when every country's records are organized and preserved. And only international cooperation can foster the hard work of supporting just and practical use of the connections between the records we each hold. History is not really national, it's international. And archives are intrinsically international too. Excuse me. Solon Buck and others convinced UNESCO to support creation of a new organization for archivists, as we know, and ICA was officially formed in 1948, which makes 2023 ICA's 75th anniversary year. After 75 years of development and growth, ICA has realized many of Buck's aspirations. It's become one of the best ways to meet the archivists who hold the other parts of our histories and to talk about the methods, political, technological, and often both, to bring closely related records back together. Over the years, ICA has developed an admittedly complicated structure to provide an international home for all kinds of archival entities. But the result is that there are many ways to find the colleagues you want to talk to within ICA. This is where I'm going to go way down into the weeds on ICA to make sure everyone understands how it works and how you can get involved. There are geographical branches like CARBICA, first of all. There's a forum of national archivists and a forum of professional associations. Any archives can join ICA as an institution, but ICA also welcomes individual archivists. A key part of the organization are the sections and expert groups that are formed around types of archives or aspects of archival work. There are sections for archivists of faith traditions, like church archivists, and sections for university archives, for local, municipal, and territorial archives, business archives, and a section for archives and human rights. There are expert groups for managing digital and physical records, emergency management and disaster preparedness, photographic and audiovisual archives, an expert group against theft, tampering, and trafficking. There are also expert groups formed especially to discuss archives and indigenous matters and shared archival heritage, two areas where international cooperation is truly essential for better understanding the issues and possible solutions for addressing the legacy of colonialism in archives. In addition to these structures in ICA, the ICA Executive Board just approved the creation of a new ICA working group on archives and climate change that will welcome the participation of anyone interested in either contributing or just learning about work in this field. The participation of CARBICA members will be especially important there because island nations have so much at stake, and some of the topics being considered for discussion by the new group relate to the intersection of digital record keeping and sustainability. As with so many other archival domains, the digital won't stay in its lane. It affects and it's affected by the issues most essential to the preservation of the archival record. On a practical note, any ICA member can join a section that aligns with your interests, and I hope you will pursue that. While expert groups are appointed by their chairs, most expert groups are actively seeking new members who can bring perspectives from archivists in other parts of the world. Excuse me. Finally, ICA's Program Commission, the group that I chair, administers 3 strategic programs: the Training Program, the New Professionals Program, and the Africa Program. ICA training courses on records management, family archives, and managing digital archives, for example, are all available online, with more coming soon. And the New Professionals Program was really delighted to benefit from a recent participant from Trinidad and Tobago, who's on this call now, who received a bursary to participate and help with the ICA conference several years ago. And we would absolutely love to have more Caribbean applications for the New Professionals Program in future years. So all of that was a little practical detour to make sure everyone knows how ICA is structured and what its longstanding concerns are. But now I want to shift to the themes that have emerged as necessary conversations for the international archival community now in 2023, since these will shape the Congress we're planning for Abu Dhabi in October. The overall Congress theme is enriching knowledge societies, with sessions organized in the following sub-themes: peace and tolerance, which means largely reconciliation, repatriation, and justice; emerging technologies, so electronic records and electronic solutions; sustainable knowledge, sustainable planet, archives, records, and climate change; and then trust and evidence, and access and memories. ICA provides a global professional commons, and you'll see that these issues that I'm addressing today with you are also at the front of our colleagues' minds all over the world. And the funny thing that becomes clear once you start unpacking these themes, or indeed once you start reviewing the proposals submitted for these themes for the Congress, you realize how permeable the boundaries between these topics are. Because emerging technologies are related to memories and evidence and peaceful coexistence in sustainable communities. ICA gives us a place to discuss how electronic records, especially in government, can support or even undercut trust and evidence. How do archives and records managers sustain trust in digital records in an era when AI makes faking video or even a specific person's voice, even for the person on the street? And how do we use emerging technologies to advance justice and reconciliation when commercially available AI tools were trained on data sets that encode generations of biased actions by humans? How do we reconcile the demands of the digital world for electronic records while maintaining environmental sustainability? Must we use more and more power for digital preservation? And what will happen to our digital archives when the electricity goes out? What will happen to community memory and access to the cultural record when climate change threatens our repositories? So all of these are the kinds of issues that we'll be discussing in the ICA community at the Congress in Abu Dhabi and going forward. Digitization of paper records is an excellent means of promoting access and use of our collections, but it can play an important role in preservation too. The famous digital preservation phrase, "lots of copies keeps stuff safe," means having digital copies stored far away when your physical collections might be affected by a disaster can ensure that the information, at least, can be saved. Still, we must balance those benefits with the cost, both financial and environmental, of relying on constant infusions of electricity to keep those digitized and born digital collections alive. As we take on the challenge of managing digital records and preserving digital archives, we're inevitably confronted with the volume of digital material our organizations are creating. It's intimidating, especially when digital repositories are added on top of archives and records departments that were plenty busy enough with just their physical collections. In order to envision a future in which our small staffs keep up with this volume and avoid simply adding vast quantities of records to unprocessed and inaccessible backlogs, archivists have been looking hopefully to artificial intelligence. AI, machine learning, and related technologies do show promise in assisting archivists in appraising and processing and describing large digital collections. AI does carry its own risks, though. The ICA is helping the global archives profession share information about the promises and the risks of AI for archives in virtual workshops on AI for appraisal. These were sponsored by the Program Commission last spring, and the videos are available on YouTube. We had a webinar on emerging technologies, including AI and blockchain, during International Archives Week last June, also available on YouTube. The Congress theme on emerging technologies is another way that we're addressing these issues. Throughout these conversations, a central focus has been on the intersection of AI and archival ethics, particularly because of the biased decisions, racist and sexist language, and unequal representation in the written record up to this point. AI tools have had lots of opportunities to learn from flawed human decisions. Off-the-shelf commercial AI tools may be able to sort through large quantities of digital information, but they may not be able to help us achieve our true underlying goals. And this is something that archivists will continue to be working together on through ICA and CARBICA. I don't want to put too much emphasis on kind of sexy cutting edge technology though. They're promising approaches to managing the volume of electronic records using totally different approaches, but these involve a different sort of politics. Archivists developing partnerships with their colleagues in IT and with software developers to ensure that new business systems create records ready to be managed and archived. Our colleagues in the National Archives of the Netherlands call this archiving by design. And for the future, this sort of approach could significantly cut the flow of uncategorized, unprocessed records into the archives. My home institution, NARA, has developed a set of universal records management requirements that government agencies can use when acquiring new IT systems to make sure that they actually can responsibly manage electronic records. And we also encourage vendors to build to these requirements if they want us to choose their systems. The ICA Congress in Abu Dhabi, and even the next generation of strategic thinking in ICA, may not answer all of these questions, but in the ICA, we will wrestle with them together, ensuring that we archivists build the digital transformation that we want, that fulfills our archival goals, so that we're not passive victims of shiny new technologies that are imposed on us by the commercial sector and that seem to be pushing the culture ahead of them. As archivists, it's our role to take the long view and to ensure that records and archives play a positive role in our communities and in the politics of digital transformation. ICA exists and has existed for 75 years now to help archivists all over the world work together for what Solon Buck called the archivists' one world. Okay. As I told you at the beginning, I like to zoom way out, look at the big picture of the profession at the ICA level, and then start zooming back in to look in more detail at particular cases of archives in the politics of digital transformation. The ground that I know best is the federal government of the United States and the National Archives, or NARA's, role there. Although this work has much earlier roots, and although NARA has been collecting electronic records since 1970, I want to focus on the last dozen or so years and NARA's role in the digital transformation of record keeping in the US government, because NARA fully embraced the lowercase p sense of politics, how you really get things done in a bureaucracy. As a group, archivists love talking about the theory and practice of appraisal and description or preservation. These are things we know how to do, and they're things we more or less control in our own operations. But there's significant impacts on our ability to do our jobs that come from above us or to the side of us. Things like decisions about resource allocation or access to real decision makers in our parent organizations. It's often the case that where the rubber really meets the road in archives is where our archival theory meets resource constraints or our ability to influence other parts of the organization to manage their records well. In order to make significant change, sometimes the skills you need are the skills of office politics. How to get a meeting with the right person, how to convince them that your plan actually supports their goals, how to identify where the real levers of change are and how to move them. I want to outline this US story of the transition to digital record keeping from that point of view, because I've come to see that perspective is really critical. First, I want to say that although among archives, NARA is quite large, within the context of the US government, we are tiny. officials at the National Archives realized that they needed higher level support to encourage all the agencies of government who had been creating electronic records for decades already to start moving towards digital record keeping. Getting presidential attention on records of archives is a once in a generation thing. It's really rare. But the archives thought that level of support was actually necessary to make the kind of widespread change we needed. The Obama administration was particularly interested in open government, as well as the potential efficiencies of digital government. So NARA saw an opportunity, a hook. The archives began discussions with the Office of Management and Budget, which is part of the White House, about the possibility of issuing a message from the president to the heads of all federal agencies, requiring them to take action to advance the digital transformation of records management. NARA led its pitch by stressing that records management is the backbone of open government. OMB thought President Obama would be receptive to this message, but there was a long queue of other agencies with equally important priorities that were hoping to get the presidential treatment, hoping to get a presidential level memo to agencies. It was such a long line that they were telling us that, yeah, it's going to take you forever to get to the front of that line. So NARA's general counsel, understanding that archives take the long view, responded to that discouraging news by saying, we're the archives, we can wait. And we did wait. But eventually in November 2011, President Obama issued a presidential memorandum to the heads of federal agencies on managing government records, which stressed the role of good digital record keeping, required input and reporting from agency heads, and critically called on NARA and the Office of Management and Budget to issue a follow-up directive outlining specific actions agencies and NARA would take to start moving the government in the direction it needed to go. So NARA and OMB followed up as required with the Managing Government Records Directive in 2012, which contained a sequence of actions and deadlines. NARA worked on its own assigned tasks and helped agencies with theirs for the next 7 years, at which point the Trump administration supported a second directive, building on the previous directive, but taking the goals the next step further, requiring the digital management of all federal records and setting December of 2022 as a deadline after which NARA would no longer accession paper and other physical records into the archives. So the existing paper collections would not grow, and we would only grow in the digital realm. So this sequence of official administrative actions allowed NARA to build a digital transformation of record keeping in our entire government, based on a good understanding of how the government really works, arranging for a more powerful office to direct us and others to make the moves that we knew were necessary, giving us cover to require changes of other agencies over the course of more than a decade. I don't want to claim that this resulted in a paradise of perfect electronic records, but it has absolutely moved the culture in a way that would have been impossible without that political support. And the ways in which progress is still a struggle for many of us often has more to do with organizational politics, upper management support, prioritization, resources, than problems of not knowing what to do or not having technology that would do it. In general, archivists know what to do. Our challenges are choosing the best tactics to create change in our organizations, how to figure out who our allies are, how to request a meeting, how to sell our proposals, how to convince the financial folks that there's a positive return on their investment in digital archives, even if the return isn't entirely financial. My last comments about the situation in the United States, the ground under my own feet, are about how the transition to digital record keeping has played out in the last couple of years. Actually meeting that deadline to transfer all permanent paper records to NARA by the end of 2022 and shift to entirely digital accessioning was hindered by the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic had other effects on the digital transformation too, as you all well know. It forced us into telework, Zoom meetings, and therefore into reliance on easily accessible digital records, which was a good thing. It showed that we were moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, it also slowed down the digitization of existing collections of permanent paper records. The deadline was extended to June 2024. So the original deadline was December of 2022, and at that point, they extended the deadline an additional 1.5 years to June 2024. So this is still in the future now for us, not just the recent past, as we originally hoped. Although the pandemic was a setback in so many ways, we're still benefiting from this logical progression of stepping stones towards digital records that was initially required by the White House, providing the support that the National Archives needed. And by the way, I just want to make sure everyone knows that NARA makes all of the documents that I've mentioned available on our website, including the specific resources created under the directive, like transfer guidance for digital formats, which formats are preferred, what metadata needs to be included with transfers. The Universal Electronic Records Management requirements are also available on the website, and our guidance on email management. The other issue I'll mention very briefly is the very high level of capital P political interest in record keeping, both of digital records, so think of encrypted messaging apps used in government circles, and also paper records covered by both the Federal Records Act and the Presidential Records Act in the United States. This is an environment, excuse me. This is an environment where government archives need to be absolutely sure that they're applying the law in a completely non-political way, following the same rules in the same way for everyone. This is the only way a government archives can ensure that it can preserve the historical record, regardless of changes in party in the upper levels of the administration. Being perceived as partisan is a scary possibility for government archives, not just the politics of digital transformation, but for the very heart of our ability to achieve our archival goals. However, even here, there's a sort of encouraging side to this story. Public interest in record-keeping issues is extremely high, and the interest includes digital record-keeping. There's widespread understanding the government officials' digital records belong to the people and need to be managed responsibly. This level of attention to records and archives can add pressure to our daily lives, but ultimately we hope that this pressure can be converted into a requirement on all agencies of government to create and manage their digital records and their paper records appropriately and with the archives' advice. They'll do that because they understand that the role of records and archives in digital transformation directly supports the things they care about most. And this is, the general public, the things the public cares about most. And what they care about is similar to what we care about. They care about justice, democracy, memory, and community. So, in conclusion, in the experience of NARA, as well as the issues archivists around the world bring for discussion to the ICA, you see many angles on the politics of digital transformation. There's not merely one issue, there are many. There are variations on a theme. Some we can see best when we're down on the ground, following specific cases. I shared one of these from my home environment. But some we can see best from the global view, when we zoom way out to see how all the archives of the world are interrelated and how all the archivists of the world are wrestling with the same issues. Of technology, yes, but also of ensuring that our archives are helping to build a more just and inclusive society, a better informed society, a wiser society, informed by history, but actively shaping the future we want to live in. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you today.